Good morning to you all. I invite you to open up your Old Testaments to Micah chapter 4, and we will read the words of the Lord from that text. Micah chapter 4. It shall come to pass in the latter days that the mountain of the house of the Lord shall be established as the highest of the mountains. And it shall be lifted up above the hills, and peoples shall flow to it. And many nations shall come and say, Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us his ways, and that we may walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the law, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. He shall judge between many peoples and shall decide disputes for strong nations far away. And they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more, but they shall sit, every man under his vine, under his fig tree, and no one shall make them afraid. For the mouth of the Lord of hosts has spoken. For all the peoples walk each in the name of its God, but we will walk in the name of the Lord our God forever and ever. In that day, declares the Lord, I will assemble the lame and gather those who have been driven away and those whom I have afflicted. And the lame I will make the remnant, and those who were cast off a strong nation. And the Lord will reign over them in Mount Zion, from this time forth and forevermore. And you, O tower of the flock, hill of the daughter of Zion, to you shall it come, the former dominion shall come, kingship for the daughter of Jerusalem. Now, why do you cry aloud? Is there no king in you? Has your counselor perished, that pain seized you like a woman in labor? Writhe and groan, O daughter of Zion, like a woman in labor. For now you shall go out from the city and dwell in the open country. You shall go to Babylon. There you shall be rescued. There the Lord will redeem you from the hand of your enemies. Now many nations are assembled against you, saying, Let her be defiled. Let our eyes gaze upon Zion. But they do not know the thoughts of the Lord. They do not understand his plan, that he's gathered them as sheaves to the threshing floor. Arise and thresh, O daughter of Zion, for I will make your horn iron, and I will make your hooves bronze. You shall beat in pieces many peoples, and shall devote their gain to the Lord, their wealth to the Lord of the whole earth. There are a lot of mountains and high places within the borders of the land of Israel, but there is only one place that was known to the people that Micah spoke to as the mountain of the Lord. That would be Jerusalem. That would be the place where God set his name and fully became the place where people would go to sacrifice to the Lord and to worship him, especially during the days of David, who took that city from the Jebusites, the people of the land. Jerusalem was a place of two mountains in particular. It had Mount Moriah, the hill there at the top of the city where Solomon would eventually build the temple that people would worship at. That was the place where the high priest served and those with him. But just south of Mount Moriah, you had another mountain. You had Mount Zion, the citadel, the place where David set up his palace and ruled as king. Do you remember how Psalm 2, verse 6 talks about how I have set my king on Zion, my holy hill, despite what the nations say about that? But in this text, taken together, the Temple Mount and Mount Zion are blended together in this passage, and they both kind of smear and become the mountain of the Lord. 3 times a year, all of the Israelites would gather to Jerusalem to celebrate several different feasts commanded for them under the law of Moses. But Micah is not, at the beginning of this chapter, he's not talking about the Passover feast or the Feast of Tabernacles when everybody would come and worship. He's talking about the latter days. He's talking about a future time in which the nations, not just the Jews, but all of the people who come to the Lord from all different languages or skin colors or backgrounds or cultures, they would all those who care about God would come to the true mountain, not just the physical place of Jerusalem, and gather to Him. This is talking about our time. This is talking about the days of Jesus Christ. And so this text would have been really weird and obscure to Micah himself as the prophet, but also to the people that Micah spoke to. They could get the sense that something's going to be really different later, and God's doing something that we don't really understand. We know now what God is doing. And so this is an invitation to us, both to come to God's mountain in Jesus Christ personally, but also to reach out to other people around us who are part of the nations and invite them to climb the mountain with us. This is going to be a challenging lesson. So buckle your seatbelts. All right? Let's talk about verses 1 through 5 here. Let's talk about what happens in the latter days. Do you notice how Micah is making the point really clearly that it's not just a little subset of people who are welcome at this place, that everybody is able to climb up, and those who are coming should reach out and welcome others who might want to come too. This is a really different mountain scene from the scene that we have in Exodus with the mountain of the Lord there. Do you remember when everybody went to Mount Sinai? What was the distance between the Lord and the people? It was great, because it was only Moses who was allowed to go up and down that mountain. And in fact, God told him when he was up there to go down in Exodus 19 and set up boundary markers and to give the people really clear instructions. You stay away from the Lord. I'm going to quote directly Exodus 19:12. You shall set limits for the people all around, saying, take care not to go up into the mountain or touch the edge of it. Whoever touches the mountain shall be put to death. And that also included animals. You know, if your sheep, wanders away from your tent and it starts going up Mount Sinai, you're supposed to take that sheep and kill it. And so it's a really serious thing. Not that the people really wanted to go up that mountain anyway, but there was that clear separation. And it's interesting that when you look at ancient history and ancient mythologies, you see a lot of cultures talking about the gods living on the mountains. Like if you go to Israel today and you look at Mount Hermon, which is a little bit north of Galilee, the highest mountain in that area in Palestine, that was where the Canaanites believed that Baal lived. If you go to Greece, okay, where do the Greeks picture their gods living? Mount Olympus, right? I can already see you guys mouthing the word. You all know that. But do you read about stories in which the gods say to the humans who lived down there in the lowlands, hey, come on up. The gods are holding a party on Mount Olympus and we've invited all of the Greeks. You don't read about that. The mortals are not welcome on the mountain with the gods. That just doesn't happen that I can think of. And if you know better than me, I'd be curious to hear about that. But the true God is different here. And starting in the prophets, there starts to be this different message than the message at Mount Sinai, which was, I'm up here, you're down there, and you stay away from me. I'll dwell with you, but from a distance. You might have noticed that the verses that we just read in Micah 4 sound an awful lot like the scripture that Mickey read for us in Isaiah 2. It's nearly identical. That there's going to be this mountain of the Lord, and people are going to all join and go up it and be with God. So Isaiah was prophesying at about the same time as Micah in his ministry, and they're both saying the exact same thing. That we're invited to come closer to a holy God who had to keep himself separated from his unholy people during the Old Testament time when sacrifices could not fully atone for sins. Think about how Jesus fulfills this. What's Jesus' most famous sermon in Matthew 5 through 7? We often call it the Sermon on the Mount. Because in Galilee, we're told in Matthew 5:1, seeing the crowds, he went up on the mountain alone and told all of his disciples to stay at the bottom. No. It says, when he sat down, his disciples came to him. They climbed up the hill with Jesus and sat down, and he talked to them about the Beatitudes, and here's how you think about relationships and all of the things that he talked about in the Sermon on the Mount. So that set the tone then for the gospel message, is you get to come close because God is now in human flesh, and now you can be one with him. So we need to digest this, because the nations here in the text are all welcomed to come up the mountain. We need to think about, are the nations welcomed amongst us? You might be thinking, well, it's not like we've got a bouncer at the door. Anybody can be a part of this, what we're doing in this assembly, anybody can join us. But it's worth unpacking this idea a little bit, because just to state the obvious, we are a mostly white, English-speaking congregation. And that, in and of itself, is not a wrong thing, a bad thing, a sinful thing. In fact, the composition of our group mostly it accords with the largest demographic of our area. So Rantoul itself is over 40% white. But there are other communities too. We got 21% of Rantoul itself is black, 13% is Hispanic. And so we just need to be thoughtful about our attitudes with each other, toward each other, but also to the surrounding people that we might rub elbows with in our communities. What is our general attitude toward people who don't look like us or speak like us or sound like us? One time, I was riding in a car with an elder of the church that I was a part of at the time. And in the area where we lived, there was a really high population of immigrants who came from the Marshall Islands in the Pacific Ocean, right? And this elder was driving the car. We drove right past a residential area, and he pointed over there. I was new to the area, and so he pointed over there as we passed, and he said, there are a lot of Marshallese folks who live in that complex back there. And unfortunately, Marshallese people are just dumb people. Because, we tested a lot of nukes on their islands, way back in the days after World War II, and it just, seeped into all of them, and they're just not intelligent folks, unfortunately. That's what he thought. Now, for context, let me add this. This guy was a good man in a lot of ways. And I appreciated the way that I saw him love on a lot of different people in our congregation. And I think if I had asked him a point-blank question like, are you a racist person? He would have said, no, I'm not a racist person. I want everybody to be saved. But I think that he had racist attitudes lurking in his heart that he just wasn't aware of, right? So I bring up his story in order to say that attitudes like that, if we're not careful, can seep into our hearts and minds as well. Think about this. When you see a black, if you're a white person in this room, if you see a black or Hispanic person walking down the road, do you look at that person and immediately think, well, there goes another lazy food stamp moocher? Or there goes somebody who might very well possibly be a gang member, because we've got gang members around this town, so let's make sure the doors are locked. Do you ever find yourself saying something like this? Yeah, that person, they do such and such, they say such and such because that's what black people do. Wouldn't it be just as silly to say, well, this is what this white person does because that's what white people do? Well, some do, but some don't. You know, I understand that the way that our brains work, God has designed our minds to try to fit information into boxes. Because that just flat out makes life easier to live when you can categorize and systematize information. And that's not a bad thing inherently, but when we put complicated human beings into negative boxes based off of really silly things like skin color, like perceived intelligence level, like a host of other things, let me ask you this. Are we going to be very eager to teach those people about Jesus? In the history of nations, there have been a lot of different people groups, the Jews being one of them, who were told by the nations that they lived in, you got to pack up and you got to move somewhere else because we don't want you anymore. But in God's kingdom, in the kingdom that is forevermore, like we just sang about, there are no second-class citizens. And that was a really hard message for the first Christians in the first century in these initial churches to absorb. They struggled with, okay, we got Jews and we got everybody else who's not a Jew. How do we all sit at the same table? They really, really struggled with that. And we need to be thoughtful about that today too, because Paul says in Colossians 3, here, in God's kingdom, there is not Greek and Jew, uncircumcised and circumcised, barbarian, Scythian, slave, free, but Christ is all and in all. Colossians 3:11. Jesus is not the personal property of white Christians. I think we've all seen those illustrations where Jesus looks like a Swedish person. He's got blonde hair and blue eyes, and that's just not who he was. Lest we forget, Jesus was not a Swede. Jesus was a Jew. His first followers were Jewish people, and we Gentiles, unless there's a Jewish person in this room whom I'm missing, we all are the newcomers. We are the foreigners who have been grafted into the Jewish tree. That's Romans 11. That's straight out of the gospel. And so we in Micah 4, we are the nations who he's talking about here. And he's mostly speaking to fellow Jews. We're the nations. We're the people who are coming up and saying, hey, we get to go to the mountain now. We get to participate in the work of the Lord. Let's go. Let's come together and unite around this new gospel, that he can teach us his law so that we can walk in his ways. This is something we all got to be passionate about if we're Jesus' people. And I suppose I am personally really passionate about this because the family that I came from, not all the family members looked exactly like me. My younger brother, Noah, who I don't think anybody in here has met yet, he's tall like me, he's got brown eyes like me, and that's where the resemblance stops. Because before he was adopted by my parents, he came from a broken situation. He had a white mother and a black father, and he was given up for adoption. My youngest sister, Gemma, is full African American. And I love both of them dearly. So before I knew anything about Micah 4, I knew, because it was impressed upon me at an early age, that the way of Jesus is inclusion of people who are not like you. That's the way of the gospel. And when you look at Jesus' genealogy in Matthew 1, you see that baked into his body, because who did he come from? If you look at Matthew 1, you're going to see a lot of Jews, you're going to see a lot of Israelites, important people like David, Abraham, but you know who you're also going to see? You're also going to see a Moabite girl. You're going to see a Canaanite prostitute. And then you're going to see another Canaanite who acted like a prostitute so she could sleep with her Israelite father-in-law. It was shocking to the Jews that Jesus worked with that he would associate with tax collectors and sinners, but he came from tax collectors and sinners. So of course he would try to reach out to them. Is that the way we are? Is that the way we are? So when we do the Bible giveaway, I neglected to mention in that announcement that we're going to have 100 Spanish Bibles with us, with the brochure translated into Spanish. I don't speak Spanish. Not many people in here do, but we're going to just do the best we can. Because this is who we are as the people of God. Something else that we see in this part of Micah is that since God has created peace, his people who come to him on the mountain modify their tools in order to reflect the purpose that has been renewed in them. Did you notice that in the text? What's interesting is that for thousands of years, human beings have made a study of warfare. You know, to this day, you can go to a Barnes & Noble or you can go on Amazon.com and you can order The Art of War, which was written in the 6th century BC by an ancient Chinese general, and people of all shapes and sizes have bought that. Other people have written things like it. People have studied how to hurt and destroy other human beings for millennia. Think about how many weapons have been fashioned out of Earth's elements. How many different kinds of swords? How many different kinds of spears? How many different kinds of cannons or guns? To this day, you know, I'll click on the news and I'll see that this military in this country around the world has just debuted a new hypersonic missile. Or now this new generation of fighters or these aircraft carriers have now come into production. This is still going on. Countries continue to outdo each other to try to hurt and destroy. And for many men throughout time, the mark of manhood has been, have you killed somebody? Are you wearing his pelt? Do you have that mark on the wall? I even know a brother in Christ who looks with pride on his time in Afghanistan and the 13 kills that he racked up. That makes sense in worldly wisdom, but that is far from the heart of God. Passage, what does God do with people who climb his mountain? You know what they're coming up with in the text? They're coming up with their swords. They're coming up his mountain with their spears. And did you notice what does God do with them first? First, he changes the people. First, he decides their disputes. He judges between them. He says, okay, we're going to just resolve all the conflicts that are going on between these people. And notice what he does. He doesn't take their weapons away from them in the text. What happens to the weapons? The people themselves, because of their changed hearts, the people take their own weapons and they change them into different things. What do they change them into? The swords become plowshares, tools used to break up the ground so that something can be planted and grow in it. And what do the spears become? The spears get turned into pruning hooks so that vines can be sheared off in productive ways so that more fruit can grow. God takes warriors and He makes them gardeners. He makes them cultivators. He makes them farmers. He takes destroyers, people who aim to kill, and He changes them into people who aim to grow. He puts people back in a garden. I want to just encourage myself and all of us to meditate on what this would mean and look like for your personal life and for mine. Maybe you don't own a sword or a spear. You probably don't. But do you have weapons in your soul that you have sharpened to a point that you are ready to deploy at a moment's notice for the people around you when you feel threatened? You know, words are a good example of how to think about this, because words can be either a plowshare or words can be a sword. Words can either kill and hurt and destroy, or words can be used to upbuild and heal and help. And if we're not on God's mountain, then we're going to bend our spirit and our mind to use our words to try to find the best possible way to cut somebody down and make them feel 3 inches high. I've done that before with my words. I've had other people do that to me with their words. Maybe you've got similar experiences. But you know what? If you're on God's mountain, what does God teach you to do with your words? To find the best possible way to help people who need help, people who are struggling and disheartened. Have you allowed the Lord to repurpose your weapons, to take your swords and your spears and to change them into something that will be suitable for the way of peace and not the way of war? You don't need to read The Art of War. You need to read Micah 4, and you need to go to the mountain, and you need to let the Lord change you. In the way of Jesus, He says, we don't need to learn. Verse 3, end of verse 3, we don't have to find the way to hurt other people anymore. That way is gone. Instead, we've got a vine and a fig tree in the picture. In the Old Testament, under your vine and under your fig tree was a common way to express everybody is peaceful, everybody's prosperous. Everybody's got a house in the neighborhood and a car in the driveway. Everybody's got meat on the table. Everybody is not worried about their lives. And we're imperfect at this right now. Right now in our lives with Jesus, we are trying to practice what this looks like, and we're not going to be perfect at it. But what we do with each other as we all grow in Christ and we get closer to the ultimate mountain, the top of it, we're going to get a small taste now of the bliss and the joy that we're going to have when we get to the top fully, completely on the final day. This is our reality. But I tell you, this is challenging to grapple with in our own souls, and sometimes it's hard to grapple with each other in our relationships, but this is the way. Let's walk in it. In 6 through 13, in the back half of this chapter, there's some really interesting passages here. One of the things that Micah is really helping the Jews to pull out is this idea that God has a place for useless people. And I say that in quotes because they're not actually useless, even though they might feel that way. The rejected people become the remnants. These are the people welcomed on the mountain, the undesirables, the lame, he says, the driven away people, the afflicted ones. And in the context here, I think he's talking about those who have become lame and afflicted and driven away because of their sins. Because verse 10, he's talking about the exile that everybody's going to go through and go to Babylon in. And that happened because of people's sins. They had made themselves worthless. But in the next breath, you notice how God says, that's not the end of your story. You're going to be redeemed. I'm going to rescue you there in Babylon in the place of exile. I'm going to help you. And I'm going to take you out of there. So the ones who don't have anything to offer God are the very ones that he's going to pursue. The ones he's going to gather at the top of the mountain for his use and his glory. This is such a powerful point when we let this sink into our hearts, because in my ministry work, I've had so many conversations, I've had so many studies with a lot of people who walk around every day just feeling really worthless. And you wouldn't always know it from the way that they publicly present themselves. They put a smile on their face, and they shake your hand warmly, and you ask them, how are you doing today? And they say, oh, I'm great. But then you go out to coffee, and you open up your Bible, and they open up theirs, and you start talking about the way of God, and they start telling you how they really feel, and how they are on the inside, and what's actually going on in their lives outside of the Sunday morning assembly. And sometimes it's really hard, and it's not good, and they struggle. They would read verse 6, the description of the kinds of people there, the lame, the driven away, the afflicted, and they would say, yep, that's me. If there's somebody in this room who's like that right now in your life, I want you to know the incredible hope of the gospel message. I want you to know that even if you don't want yourself, there's someone who does want you desperately. And even if you can't imagine living with joy because of your shame, because of your guilt, you need to believe that his power and his compassion on you is greater than your shame. He wants to make you part of his strong nation with all the other lame people that he's gathered, because it's only lame, afflicted, driven away people on this mountain. It's not the strong. It's people who he has made strong. Let that be hope for you if you need to hear that. And I don't know if anybody does need to hear that this morning, but I hope that sinks in if it does. Something else that we need to pull out of this text is that Micah is getting across the message that the tragedies and the sorrows and the immediate future of pain that the Israelites are living in currently and going to be experiencing, that's not going to be eclipsed by what's coming in the future. That there is victory ahead for God's people, even though in the meantime, life really stinks for these people. You notice how in verse 9, Micah asks, is there no king in you? Micah is saying, I noticed that there's a lot of groaning around here. There's a lot of people who are writhing and suffering in different ways. Isn't there a counselor? Isn't there a king who's sitting on the throne in Jerusalem? And yeah, there was. But Judah's kings were not great. Even Hezekiah, who did prophesy during the days of Micah, Hezekiah was phenomenal in some ways, but even he had his problems and his warts, because every godly leader, this might help us have compassion on godly leaders, every godly leader is just going to be a pale shadow of the true leadership of God. Our leaders are nodding yes, it is true. So Judah is suffering under their leadership. They're also going to suffer when foreign nations come to thresh them Assyria was going to sweep in, and they were going to mostly conquer Judah, except for Jerusalem. And then Babylon was going to come in and just completely destroy the nation. So groaning and writhing, it was going to happen on a national scale, but it wasn't the end of Judah's story. Because verse 7, did you notice how the Lord explicitly says, I'm going to reign over you guys. I'm going to be your king. This is not, you're not going to just ail under poor leadership. I'm going to be there for you. So he's recycling the shepherd king image from chapter 2. And verse 8, he talks about the former dominion, the peace, the security under David that's going to be restored. And although the nations here are making their plans to crush the people of God, God says about them, they don't know what they're talking about. They don't know the kind of plans I have for them. Because my people, at the end of the day, are going to be the ones with the bronze hooves and the iron horns. And they're going to arise and thresh the enemies under their feet. They're going to be the conquerors at the end. Despite whatever pain you might be going through right now, or might go through at some point in the future, do you have this kind of focus centered in your heart? Jenny and I are still getting to know some of your stories, but we've gotten enough of your stories to know that there are people in this room, plenty of people in this room, who know what true suffering really feels like. Some of you haven't just buried parents. You've buried spouses, and some of you have even buried children. Some of you have wrestled with the devil in mighty battles and experienced collateral damage in all kinds of ways. Some of you know exactly what verse 10 is talking about when it's describing writhing and groaning, even if you've never been a woman or somebody who has actually given birth, which is the picture of that verse. Our faith in God is not incompatible with acknowledging that life in this world sometimes has really, really hard days. You know, I think about what Paul says in Romans 8, how he even mentions, and he is not wallowing in the mire by any means, but he says, we who have the first fruits of the Spirit groan inwardly as we eagerly await the redemption of our bodies, our adoption as sons. This existence in this life is not heaven, and we don't have to pretend that it is. But what we should do is keep our eyes firmly fixed on where we're headed, toward higher ground. We're pressing on the upward way, as we sometimes sing in that song. That would have been a good one to suggest for you, but I didn't think about that. Not every story has a happy ending when you pick up literature books. But you know, God's story does. And if you are in His story, your story will be a conquering moment someday, even if you get up on a Monday morning or a Tuesday or a Wednesday or a Thursday and it sure doesn't feel like you're a conqueror. But you know what else Paul says in Romans 8? That we are more than conquerors through Him who loved us. If you attach yourself to the cross, you will gain the victory of the cross. One day we're going to watch the father of lies, who has made our lives miserable here. We're going to watch him be cast into the lake of fire with all those who have followed his way. And we're going to take our places on the thrones that he's prepared for us at the right hand of God. Because The promise in 2 Timothy chapter 2 is that if we endure, we will also reign with Him. Do you think about that on a Monday morning? So often I don't, but I should. We're going to become the threshers. We have been threshed by the devil in all kinds of ways, but we will become the ones with the iron horns and the hooves of bronze. So let me just encourage you simply to keep climbing the mountain if you are already on that path. And if you are, to make sure that you're not just worrying about whether you're climbing yourself, but to also worry about whether your neighbors next to you in this church, in our communities, are having the opportunity to climb too. Because climbing is not meant to be a solo activity. Climbing is come. Let's go to the house of the Lord on top of the hill, and let's help each other get there. We're going to sing a song that Stephen's going to lead, 366. And if we can help you, we would love to know how we can help you. As together we stand up and sing.